All right, how's it going? I wanted to share some of my macro kind of real estate valuation opinions, as we're probably going to be purchasing around 80 to 100 million of manufactured home communities this year. And so we're like rate locking some deals this week. It's the beginning of August 2025. So there's been a lot of movement this year, obviously on the political spectrum and unfortunately wars. So there's a lot of macroeconomical impacts and news and things that kind of swing the needle all over the place. And mix in the corporate debt maturities that are coming around the corner in the next year to two. And then everyone's holding on those with treasuries and looking at what their new rates will be. Same thing with governments and United States debt and the debt crisis and all that stuff that's been going on. So I don't want to lean too much into the weeds just because there's so much there. It would take forever to analyze it all. And so I highly recommend Peter Linneman on the Willie Walker podcast. He's a huge insight for us. We buy the data now and we'll be sharing it across our investor platform in summaries for like multifamily and applicable outlooks. But where we look to those types of sources for really good data, I now have formed opinions on how to hedge and play in the game of commercial real estate and multifamily, specifically our asset class in manufactured housing, is we're leaning away from higher loan to values, which are pretty expensive in rate today. So we're kind of wanting to make sure that the real estate we buy now is sound in valuation today, but then as we generate revenue increases in rents and have the ability to move the needle in revenue, that will create a larger chasm or a larger equity amount in each deal that we do. And so I'm leaning away from higher debt loads and higher loan to values. In the moment, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are pricing really good under 60%, call it moderate leverage, 55% or less loan to values. And we're doing 10-year interest only loans because that gives us, it locks in our rate today, takes the risk factor out of the uncertainty, and we go 10 years into the future with that rate. And what, in my opinion, as we've done this for 16 or so years now, what I'm trying to do is be able to benefit from rates going down in the future, but also hedge and lock in the rates today into the future for 10 years. The more time I have, the more equity I can build, the more revenue, the rents will most likely, the more time we have left, the higher the rents we can achieve. And so we set out our initial targets for 10 years every time we do a model when we're buying a newer property. So we'll set that target. And then even if I don't make it all the way to that 10-year pro forma target, I still have so much equity. The equity we're putting down now, which is 45%, 55% loan to value, 45% equity. By the time 10 years clicks through and we now have executed on our business plan, we will probably be 20 to 30% loan to value. And the way I'm thinking about it now is I want to make sure, even if a crazy scenario happens, Fannie Freddie are out of the picture and out of the game for whatever reason. They are like quasi-government subsidized entities. They just interact, in my opinion, almost a little bit too close. We're gonna use them as while the going's good, we're gonna use them and get as many loans as we can. And I hope that they're around, but I don't want to make huge bets on long-term credit availability for the future indefinitely. I think that we always have to keep a finger hold on what could happen if something big changes within the government, and we had that big tax bill go through this year. So that's always a risk. I wouldn't say it's a big risk, but it is a risk. So then there's a lot of fun conversations being had around credit availability and macroeconomics and why certain assets balloon in value and basically have bubble moments in asset classes. And we saw it in office, we saw it in multifamily. What happened is there was so much cheap debt available, cheap credit available for operators to be able to borrow and use for the purchase of those assets, that the values ballooned and then go into that bubble territory. And then they had adjustable rate or floating rate mortgages, and the chaos ensued. And so in our future projections now, I would rather work harder to put more equity together, incentivize it with everything we have on the tax code today. We can use depreciation. We can use all of the front-loaded benefits and to offset that initial extra amount of equity, but you're buying that safety and that hedge by putting more money down today, fixing the rate and taking the risk out 10 years, where now we have a 20 or 30% loan to value. Historically, I just recently did research going back a couple hundred years on debt and who was the players. How did you finance an apartment building in major metros in the 1800s? It boils back down to relationships and bank relationships, and it's more banks within that city or in that town. And then you go into like life insurance company mortgage products that they put out there. And so that's like baseline. Then you get on to the more commercial mortgage-backed securities, and now Fannie and Freddie, which are like almost viewed as government bonds because they're insured by the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. government. So we're in a new era of credit availability. And I think everyone should be cognizant of that. Even like home prices now, with the increase in rate, less people can afford it, but the credit's still available for people that make money. So it's just not easy to come by and easy to borrow right now unless you really have the financial strength. I think on one hand, that's good because we don't want to perpetuate bubbles. But I do think that, for a normal home price in certain locations, 6 to 7 or 8% mortgage rates, that's a huge hurdle. And so that will end up impacting values here and there as we go down into the future, from just single family on up to apartment building values. I know of several apartment brokers that are doing really good right now, but they're selling a lot of buildings that have debt instruments that are either coming due and they can't refinance out, or construction loans or adjustable rate, floating rate loans. So you have a lot of stirred up debt issues across multifamily. And so our takeaway now is let's hedge, let's fix rate. Right now we're borrowing at like between 5.25% and 5.5% interest only for 10 years. And I just feel like you got to look at the historic precedence of that rate. And historically, that's a very fair rate. And so we're going to just round down on the loan to values, fix the rate, and take the properties which we really truly believe in their abilities to produce income for the next 10 years and grow in revenue, grow in rents. We're focusing mostly on properties that have rents that are currently under market versus focusing on projections. And we're buying them based on current market rents and the performance that asset does at current market rents. That's all we have to get to in order to cash flow and be not only cash flow positive, but spin off a really good 5 or 6% cash on cash. And then the gravy or the icing on the cake is from there, where do rents go in the next 10 years? And so I feel like you got to go back to the basics right now and focus on driving value long-term in just revenue, and then not getting over your skis on debt. And this year, it's been really fun to lean into relationships and tell everybody why we're shifting our focus to more or less the stabilized assets that are in core locations. Slight reduction in overall returns, but the risk factors are substantially mitigated, and we're hedging across every angle. And we're really focused on pruning the portfolio and getting away from higher debt to income levels, and across all the properties, across our company, the management company, the asset management company, and just minimize into the uncertainty that is present and see where this credit market goes. Because it's really, if you look at just in general where asset values are across the board, it's how much money can be borrowed in order to buy those assets. That's really the key to understanding asset appreciation. And that's another reason why huge market cap technology companies are growing, is there's a lot of instruments that can be used and money to be borrowed to buy stock. So it's an interesting time. So I'd recommend going back to the basics and keeping debt under reasonable levels, and then continuing to pursue deals with basically old school back of the napkin math, where you have a good room for error on if rents achieve what you think they're going to do, and make sure if expenses balloon because of different parameters that are going on in different inputs and outputs on products and services that you need to operate that building or asset in general. That's really what you should focus on. Go back to the basics and execute. Keep it simple. The best deals we've ever done are the most simple in the best locations. So yeah, there's our quick little summary for you. All right, if you're enjoying this content, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, and check out the description below for our websites listed. Thanks a lot for joining.